Hi, welcome to another edition of WCM's Outdoor Hospitality Update. And we're excited to be back with you. Here in Michigan, the fall weather's coming on. I mean, the leaves are changing. It's a beautiful time of year. Mike, the leaves don't change in Hawaii, do they?
Oh, there are hardly any leaves. It's all just palm fronds.
Oh, and I noticed the people behind you are still chilling at the RV.
Yeah, I can't get my brother-in-law out of that chair.
But well, welcome everyone. We're excited to be talking today about reservation issues, phantom reservations, some different things that campers will try to do to get more sites, and some different trends. With us today is somebody probably a lot in the two people who are pretty well known in the industry. Mark Koep from campgroundviews.com. He's the CEO and founder, and they're doing some great work with virtual tours now. And then Kathleen Walsh from Advanced Outdoor Solutions. She's in Florida. And you guys do reservation. You guys have your own reservation system. I believe you guys are still representatives for New Book, right? And some other companies.
We are. New Book is kind of our go-to platform for our large parks. And when we third-party manage a park, that's typically the reservation system they go on.
Okay. And then you guys also do like park management, correct?
We do. We're third-party managers. We're in about 30 of the 50 states now. So, we're excited about the growth of AOS over the last 10 years. And I think we're getting ready to go into Minnesota for the first time, our first park in Minnesota.
All right. Okay.
Very good.
And so, Mike, I think you've written a little bit about, I think we'll just bring up the phantom reservations at first. Can you explain what a phantom reservation is for people who may not know?
Yeah, this is a relatively new thing, I guess, just because it exploded after the pandemic happened. But it was a practice of campers going onto reservation sites and booking more than one site, typically in multiple locations. And it's kind of a product of people not knowing quite where they want to go yet, or want to keep all their options open. And so they will go and they'll into a region and they'll book sites at two different parks. And then as the time nears, they'll narrow it down, decide which one to go to. And they'll usually wait right to the last minute to decide where they're going to go. And if they're within the cancellation window, for instance, then they'll just let it go and just take the hit on whatever the rate or the penalty was, if it's not too great. And this is really accelerated lately, at least in the campers' minds, because they see a lot of empty sites out there on campgrounds that are technically full as far as the reservation system is concerned. I think it's because they pulled out the reservation calendars to a year or a year and a half or even 2 years now. So people are being forced to make their plans, make their decisions 18 months out. And there's a lot of things that can happen in 18 months with births, deaths, weddings, all this other stuff that may impact dates. And so people are laying a broad option package out and then just letting it ride. And it's really aggravating a lot of campers out there when they show up at a campground, that they probably had to wait till the last minute to get a reservation. And if they were able to, or somebody just goes in and drives around a public park and sees all these empty sites with tags on them that says reserved, and nobody ever shows up. So that's kind of what phantom reservations is in a nutshell.
I guess, Mark, on your end, I guess you do some work with the government now. I guess you're one of those government people.
Lucky you.
Yeah. I guess, from your viewpoint, have you, I guess, with your work at campgroundviews.com and stuff, I guess, have you seen has this become more of an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and to clarify, no, we don't work for the government, but we've implemented our virtual tours for recreation.gov. So just want to be really clear on that one. But we have teams out that are filming these campgrounds and visiting them, and we are seeing it firsthand. To give you an idea, recreation.gov on an annual basis only runs about 40% occupied. So if you look across the entire recreation.gov system on an annual basis, only about 40% occupied. And even during their peak time, which would be July, right? The peak season, July 5th weekend, they only have about a 65% occupancy across their networks. And the reason that happens is most people know about the popular recreation.gov properties, the popular national parks, the popular Forest Service, but they don't know about the lesser known ones. So what's happens is they don't go to them, and instead they try to book in the popular locations, and they do as Mike suggested. Because you got to put yourself in the shoes of the consumer, right? This is going to be their one trip this year that they're going on, or maybe 1 or 2 trips. It's going to be 7 to 10 days. They're going to be visiting 2 or 3 campgrounds. And with everybody else camping, they have urgency to lock in those spots. They'll just book them. I'm just booking the spot. I found a spot. I'm booking it. We don't know if we're actually going to be there or not, but let's just keep that booking. And so anecdotally, we are hearing a lot of stories where people are just like, well, it's $20 a night. It's cheaper than a motel. Well, let's just hold on to the reservation in case we need it. And then they never use it. So the site ends up going unused, even though the public agency is still making money on it. It's still being booked. It's still being paid for, but there's actually nobody sitting in that site to camp there.
Yeah, I mean, that would be extremely frustrating. If you're definitely driving through a park and you see a bunch of empty sites and nobody ever shows up, that would definitely be frustrating. I guess, Kathleen, do you see some of this on the private park sector with some of the parks you work with, or have you heard of this happening?
Yes, I've heard of it a lot, and I tell you what we deal with more than this Phantom reservation is we're dealing with subletting. So some aspiring entrepreneur will go and book sites in high demand areas, and then they'll flip those reservations at an upcharge. So Moab, Utah, for example, is one of my high demand areas. So someone will book our sites in Moab, and then they'll sell them to someone else at a higher rate. And we've really started to crack down on that because, as you can imagine, that opens up the Pandora's box as far as liability issues, because the person coming in has not seen our policies and procedures, has not signed off on our policies and procedures, and we have no idea who's staying at our park. So we've been very proactive on that, and absolutely do not allow it, and check IDs when people come in.
So, Kathleen, how sophisticated are these people? Are they using bots to make these reservations all in big bundles? Or how do you get in front of them?
We believe that they are, but then there's also just probably the kid in his parents' bedroom, going into these high demand areas, wanting to make a buck and buying up these high demand sites and then flipping them. So we're very careful to address that in our rules and regs, and we're very careful to check IDs when they come in. Because, I've had people say to me, well, why do you care? You made your money off the site. Why do you care if they're subletting? Well, I care a lot. I need to know who's in my park. If I have a fire in Utah, I need to know the name of the guests who were there so we can account for them. And most importantly, I need to be able to avoid any liability issues by having our waivers signed by the actual guest, not the person who booked the reservation.
So, Mark, you've come up with this wonderful software, and it's really fun to take the tour. And you were kind enough to let me in a few weeks ago to noodle around a little bit. It's does your software make it easier for folks like this? Because you get to see, as you're traveling in this video, what's available, and you can just click on it and go right to the reserve.gov and make that reservation.
Yeah, it would allow it. The whole idea is to make it easier to find campsites. So where it's not going to help is gaming, and that's where like Kathleen's solution comes into play. It ends up coming down to the park operators and managers to set up rules and procedures to stop this. For example, there was, you ever heard of Rincon Parkway outside of Ventura, California? It's a public, it's run by the county, and you park your RV. It's usually where you see the cool drone shots with the ocean and all the RVs parked along it. It's that spot. And a few years back, the local county firefighters and county sheriffs had this whole money-making scheme where, because they had some free time, they're off during the week, they would start parking their rigs there so they reserved the spot, and then they were listing them on Craigslist, and then somebody would pull up, pay them some money, they'd switch out the RV, and then they were doing this whole money-making scheme. And so the county had to set in rules and procedures on, hey, if you make the booking, you have to stay there. We had checking IDs and doing all that type of stuff, and they eliminated that process. So this may just be a sign of the times because it's so crowded out there. But it really is something to be aware of as an industry. Are we okay with it or not? And if the answer is not, what do you do to compensate for it?
I guess I can tell you that on the consumer side, on the camper side, it's a real aggravator. I think on RV travel, we get a lot of talk. There's a weekly column that one of our former guests here, Nancy Dix, has really tracked really well how campers feel about campground crowding, and that within that column, this issue comes up all the time about, well, I was just on this campground, said it was full, nobody else could get in, I couldn't get my friend in, and then I see nothing but empty sites all over the place.
Yeah, and so Mike, that actually might be the answer right there. So any industry only succeeds if their customers are happy, and if you're seeing an overwhelming complaints from the consumers, then as an industry, I think the decision means fix it. Let's do something about it and prevent it.
Yeah, one of the things we do in that instance is if our office is closing, let's say 8 p.m., and we have guests who haven't arrived by that time, we call them and find out if they're coming. And if they're not coming, we immediately release that site for both online booking and new reservations, because we're not going to let site nights sit there empty and expire. So we're very proactive about contacting people who haven't arrived by the time the office closes.
Yeah, I guess, on the consumer front, especially like what you talked about, Kathleen, when they buy a site from another third party, I guess, I imagine it must create some sort of anger or angst or whatever when they get to the campground and the campground owner checks their ID and they're not the ones who booked it. I guess, how does the industry prevent a situation like that? I mean, do you put warnings on your website, we don't accept third party, you have to reserve through us? I guess, how do you avoid that?
Well, let me be clear. We love third party booking. So if it's through a legitimate channel like an Airbnb or booking.com, those guests had to sign our policies and procedures. So we're fine with that. What we're not fine with are these unlicensed, Wild West resellers out there. And where I actually see it most abused is in my seasonal parks, where someone has their RV on site for a specific period of time, and then they turn it into a rental property. And that's incredibly dangerous because I have no idea. Do they have smoke detectors? Do they have carbon monoxide detectors? Do they meet any ADA requirements? I mean, that is a whole other Pandora's box that has opened up recently that we've really tamped down on. So our seasonal agreements, which my husband writes all our agreements, he's an attorney, and he writes our agreements for every state, and we specifically outline how irresponsible and dangerous that is, and you will be removed immediately with no refund if we find you subletting at one of our parks.
Kathleen, are they using like Airbnb or Craigslist or everything to advertise these? How have you had that experience, and what did it look like? And when you found out, did you immediately eject the person?
They do use all of those avenues. Many times it's friends and family. So we find it because our staff all of a sudden recognize or don't recognize someone that's in that particular unit. And when they go to inquire, the guests have no problem saying, well, I booked this through Airbnb, or I'm a friend of Joe's and he charged me to use it. So we're very, this year was tough. This year was very tough on that. And so our new seasonal agreements for 2022 are just now coming out. And there is a zero tolerance policy because it puts AOS at risk, it puts our owners at risk, and whether the owner of the RV understands it or not, they've put themselves at risk.
Yeah. I guess, back kind of to the Phantom reservations, I guess, at the public parks, it seems like, you could rent book a bunch of sites at some different parks, and it's relatively cheap. I know in Indiana, it's $12 a night. It's, for some sites, if you book 3 or 4 of them and you only camp at one, you're only out the, $36, $40, whatever it would be. I guess at private parks, it's a little bit more expensive. But maybe at some point down the road, people are willing to still take that risk. Do you see phantom reservations like becoming an issue for private parks, or is that just something that's probably not going to happen?
I don't think it would happen as aggressively because the private parks are more nimble in their response. They would see it, right, and they might be okay with it. Hey, I got paid and I got a bunch of empty sites. Sweet, I can go sleep, right? There might be some owners who say that, but others who are more aware, they would recognize a few things. Maybe their rates are too low, right? So they might get into some dynamic pricing or raise their rates. They could also look at their cancellation policies that they have in place. Or if you don't show up, do you lose one night or do you lose the whole booking? Mm-hmm. Are they collecting all the monies up front or are they collecting them upon check-in? So the good thing about private parks is that they can be nimble and adjust their policies and procedures. The problem for public park managers is generally they're not the decision makers, right? If they want to even raise the rate from $12 to $13, it usually takes an act of Congress and a giant fight just to make that happen. So for the public park managers, camp hosts, and so forth, I do feel for them. They are in tough situations, and I do know that this year has been rough for managers. It's been there's been a lot of angst out there. So, that would be my kind of feedback in regard to the private parks and how fast they could adjust to this. Kathleen's a perfect example, right? You're adjusting your policies for this next year, problem solved, at least that problem solved. There'll probably be another one that pops up with who knows.
Well, and the other thing we've done very aggressively is that our high demand parks, we're 100% at the time of booking. You pay everything up front and our refund policies are 60 days out. Sometimes even longer than that if it's a cabin. So, but you're right, we can adjust that. We can adjust daily what we're doing to meet these situations, whereas public parks don't have that luxury.
So, Mark, what are you hearing from the folks on the government side at the Reservation.gov organization? Are they aware of it? Are they making plans to deal with it? Is it a local issue that the local manager has to deal with only? It would seem like that would be a high impact on your business too.
Yeah, so Recreation.gov is run by a contractor that's managing the software system. So think of NewBook, think of CampSpot. They're basically a reservation system. Their client are the federal parks, and the actual decision makers are the park managers. So if you're looking at, you say Forest Service campgrounds, there's thousands of those, but there's also hundreds of Forest Service, individual Forest Services, like, whatever, Roosevelt National Forest, whatnot. And then within that, there's different ranger districts that manage the campgrounds. And depending upon the rules of that agency, the decision may go all the way down to the local level or be at a regional level. So the rules are set there. Recreation.gov just provides the technology and tools for them to do their business. And so what ends up happening, you see this all the time. So what I know from Recreation.gov and in speaking with them, their biggest issue has been dealing with all the changes related to COVID and all the different shutdowns and all that, the ticketing systems for ticketed entry into Rocky Mountain National Park. They had to create that on the fly when that decision came down to do that. So they're just providing the technology. It ends up going down to the local areas, the local departments that make the decisions on the campground. So that goes back to what I mentioned, when the public agencies may be aware of this, and I'm sure their camp hosts are, but they're powerless to stop it because of the decision chain that has to happen before anything actually changes.
So Kathleen, how do you know you have a problem? Is it, again, this is something for the small operator, the large operator, the chains. How does a campground owner know that they've got phantom reservations or the shenanigans going on under the covers?
Well, again, with us and the subletting this year, it was heads up by our staff, knowing who's at their park, knowing that this person didn't belong in this particular site. So I really give a lot of that credit to my staff who recognized what was going on at their parks. And then with phantom reservations, again, we call. If you're not in your site by the time we're closing our office, we call you. And if we get no response or you're MIA, we open that site and we rent it out. And sure, it could every 100th time come back to bite us. It's sort of like overbooking the way the airlines do. But if you're not in by the time nightfall comes, we can't get a hold of you, we release the site. And one of the other things, Mark, that's really important at the national parks, and you just saw this sadly this week with someone from Florida, if you don't know who's in your park, then you can't address a situation like happened this week with the lady who was found dead. If I have someone else's my reservation name, but they sublet it or sold it to this couple, that throws a whole different dynamic into having to know who's in your park in case of emergency. So that's why we're cracking down on it so harshly in the AOS parks. And again, my owners are like, well, why do you care? Because you're getting money. But when I walk them through the liability of the situation, they're like, oh yeah, that's very dangerous for us.
Yeah, and I think that liability is part of the hidden thing that most people don't, unless you run a park or operate a park, you don't realize the liability and the volume of lawsuits that you face as a park operator, trip and falls and all sorts of just random stuff. And on the public agencies, they generally have, the ability just to say, you ain't suing us, right? We're a public agency, you assume the risk. And so there's a different liability structure. Maybe that's part of the answer, right? Is the problem is the private parks have that and they have to deal with that, whereas the public agencies, not so much.
Now there are like parks that do let subletting, correct? Like some of your luxury RV parks where they have permanent sites, I believe, let you to sublet. I don't know if Ocean Lakes Family Campground allows that, but they have they have hundreds of cabins that people rent or buy for years. So, there are campgrounds that do that. I guess, are there certain procedures that they have to go through to do something like that?
Yes, there are. And my friend who you had on a couple of weeks ago, Amir Harpaz, he has many cabins at his properties that people buy and they can sublet. The key is they do it through his office so that the guest is covered and he takes a percentage of that booking to cover all the overhead and all the ancillary, expenses that go along with that. So it's done properly. And all of the boxes are checked for that person coming in. So it is a very lucrative process for some parks, but again, it's done properly. It's not done sort of like on the black market.
Yeah. I guess, we talked about phantom reservations, the subletting. I guess, are there any other things that you guys have noticed that campground campers are trying to do to get sites or to make money, I guess?
Yeah, there's been a big trend towards, there's a number of these platforms out there that are providing automated tools and bots to monitor availability of sites and then text people or in some cases, maybe even lock in those sites. And again, that's a function of demand for these different areas. So obviously, if it's a popular spot with not many sites available, it may be a useful tool. What it's doing is it's making it a technological answer for the consumer, but if you're not tech savvy as a consumer, you're missing out. And so some people are able to use it, some people are not. So that's an interesting trend. It was actually happening in California state parks a lot, and they just shut it down. They turned off the API access for that tool, couldn't use it anymore, eliminated that service. On the flip side, it says something about demand. If the demand's so high that consumers are doing that, maybe there's a different answer to that problem. And is it increased rates? Is it more camping opportunities? Whatnot? And the other trend we've seen over the last year are, the Airbnb of camping, where all of a sudden people are renting out just random private property as campgrounds. Huge issues there, right? Huge issues on liability. And you're seeing more of that, again, to the point that there's a lot of people that want to go camping and they're looking for places to camp.
Yeah, I know, Ben, that's what Amir talked about with you a couple of weeks ago, and it was apparently a pretty hot topic.
Yeah, we got, boondocking. Obviously, I think any campground owner gets a little angst about, for obvious reasons. Amir did a really good job, and, we didn't get through all of the questions. Obviously, we don't want to see unregulated large campgrounds, but there is an issue, obviously, with people trying to find sites. And I think some of these people realize, hey, I live in this beautiful location. Why can't I have a couple, that one guy in California, why can't I have like a couple dozen campsites? And, but there's a process for safety. And we see every day new developments come in to Woodall's Campground magazine. And it's just, the industry, I feels like trying to add more sites, but it's just a deluge right now.
Yeah,
and
zoning.
And
Mark's
zoning.
right. Zoning keeps me on an airplane almost every week. I mean, I have to travel to almost every state in the country trying to explain to planning and zoning committees that this is a luxury campground. This is not a rundown trailer park. And the movie, if I hear it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. They keep bringing up the movie Nomadland, which I have not seen, but the county hearings and the surrounding neighbors will say, well, this is going to turn into that Nomadland. And I'm like, it's nothing like that. But Mark's right. I mean, the demand is high, and it's tough to get a campground approved these days, particularly in certain locations.
So Kathleen, on your existing parks, what's happening with the booking calendars? I know that in my time at KOA, I just saw them keep expanding. It used to be that the calendars would all open up in probably February 1st, and they would, the demand being what it was several years ago, they would, people would trickle in, make their plans for the summer. But now there's demand to have a rolling calendar of 12 months at least, or 18 months. And now I'm hearing 2 years out, which forces some campground owners to set rates way in advance.
Yeah, we will only do 365 days because of exactly what you stated. And in high demand parks where we yield 5-6 times a week, we will say, we'll take your reservation for next year and a deposit, but we haven't released our rates yet. And so, but we will allow them to cancel with no penalty if when we set rate, it's too high for their taste. But we only do 365 days, and we yield rate daily. We have 2 full-time revenue managers on staff. All they do every day is watch rate, occupancy, pickup. And so we yield up and down daily. And so we never set stagnant rate. We always say starting from. We rarely advertise rate on our websites, and our staff must always look at the booking grid to quote rate.
Yeah, which is very similar to hotels. I mean, when I booked my hotel for the Glamping Show USA, which is coming up here in a couple of weeks, I mean, that's what the hotel did. I mean, it said starting from, and you didn't know your final until you went through the system and clicked on what the dates and when, what room you wanted and different things. And then it finally gave you a final price.
Right.
So, I mean, the consumers on the hotel end of things at least are familiar with that train of thought. So
Mike, another thing we're doing is expanding our seasons if the weather allows us to. So if parks in cold weather areas, if they didn't open until May and they closed Columbus weekend, we're trying to push that envelope. We hope to be April 1 to October 31 if the weather allows us to do so, just because the demand is high. And honestly, there's still so much good camping weather, even in those locations after Columbus weekend. So we're really extending our seasons where the utilities allow us to do so.
So Mark, you're the cutting edge of technology here in the camping business. What's coming? I know that you've got this new technology for the video end of it. Is that going to sweep across the industry, or is that the plan?
So if we look long term, there's one thing that's holding back our industry, one thing, and that's that all of the reservation systems do not talk to each other, and they generally don't share their data. So that's going to change. Like companies like NewBook are making those changes, right? They're integrating, they're allowing third-party integrations. Obviously, I want that, right? Because that'll enable our tools for those but that's the reason I want it is the reason other people want it. There are better tools and better ways for people to book and find campsites. And if we open up that availability, that will change things, and that will significantly improve the overall bookings of the industry, which actually I was going to ask Kathleen a question because it kind of dovetails on this. One of the big questions coming into the industry, into the season this summer, Kathleen, was how many new campers we were going to see that entered the industry. My guess was we would see like a 20% bump in overall campers this season. You've kind of got some insight into it, so it's higher. So how many new campers percentage-wise do you think we bumped up this summer? And this might go back to Mike's question, because if we've seen this massive increase in all these new campers who are used to hotels and everything else, it goes to, supporting what I started with there. So Kathleen.
I would say, Mark, conservatively, it was about double that. So it was probably a good 40%.
Oh my God.
The way I knew it was going to snowball is I was at one of my parks at Niagara Falls before they were hit peak season. It was very early in their season, and there were only 6 check-ins that day, and all 6 were new RVers. And I put on my blog that very evening that parks needed to be prepared this coming season for those guests, because those guests didn't know how to back in their rigs. They were most of the time getting them on RV Trader or Outdoorsy. They needed to be trained on how to operate them, and that parks needed to staff accordingly. As the season wound down, it was about 40% of newbies out in the industry. And I'm laughing because my brother-in-law was texting us last night. He's a newbie with a new Airstream. He's on Prince Edward Island. And I mean, I say this all the time. My brother-in-law could vacation any way he wants. He's a patent attorney. He got into RVing because of COVID, fell absolutely in love, bought his Airstream, and will never leave the industry now. And so he's indicative of what we've seen all summer long.
Yeah, and that never leave the industry. We're seeing the same thing. I thought that there would be this massive increase and then people would just sell the rigs at the end of the season. We're not hearing that at all. The consumers absolutely love the industry and they want to continue. Not only do they want to continue, but they are continuing. They didn't stop at the end of Labor Day. They're still traveling right now all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I don't think he's coming back for a month, actually.
Yeah. Well, I know I'm hoping there's at least some rigs that hit the market, because I would like to get one, and I don't want to pay, what was it? I just went to a dealership over the weekend and there was a smaller travel trailer and they wanted $30,000 for it. And, I'm not ready to pay that much money, but I'm hoping that there's some good used ones that hit the market. But
you have a lot of connections. Somebody should be able to hook you up.
Well, maybe I can get Bob Martin at Thor to give me a new motor coach. I can, maybe he'll give me one for a heavy discount. So
there's probably another whole topic there, Ben, with what Kathleen's mentioned too, about how campgrounds are going to have to change their operations to deal with almost 50%, almost half of your campers are new to it. That's huge. I mean, the etiquette side of it has always been an issue, but all of a sudden you've got people that don't understand pet policies. They don't understand what to do with their kids or how to manage their kids on a park. They don't understand the noise rules. I mean, it's just a completely different feel. And it's not just the fact that they're new. The ethnic mix has changed. I think camping is now available for everybody all the time. And I think with this influx, how long does it take for a newbie not to be a newbie anymore?
Yeah.
Well,
I'm sorry. And connectivity, I think, is part of that too, Mike. I mean, the reality is people with mobile hotspots, our videographer out there, he's running around with an AT&T and a Verizon card. And he just sent me, he was on a ferry out on the North Carolina, those barrier islands in the middle of the water with 111 down off of his cell connection. I mean, that type of connectivity allows people to stay out, work from the road, school from the road. And then obviously Elon Musk is doing this Starlink satellite network. Who knows what that does? That could completely unlock connectivity and the ability of people to work virtually. And who knows where our industry goes? I just know it's going up, and the demand is now. A few years ago, I argued that demand was not outstripping supply. after the summer, demand is outstripping supply. We're running out of places to put people, and that's something that needs to change rapidly. Otherwise, where are people going to camp?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
I think a couple years ago when they when we had some people write about the demand issue, it was mainly at the popular parks. But I think this summer you noticed, especially from like June to August, there, every park was almost full, especially on the weekends. I mean, there was some midweek availability, but you got to Saturday, and I mean, every park was pretty much filled, even the parks that are out in the middle of nowhere. Um, you know, People were just trying to find anywhere to park their rigs at. So they were
Yeah.
willing to go anywhere.
Well, and
So
it's definitely a different experience out there, and I'm sure Kathleen's seen this too. When you've got staffing problems that all campgrounds had this year, they just couldn't find workers. Well, that impacts everything from your pancake breakfast to your garbage pickup, and all, or how often the bathrooms get cleaned. So all of a sudden, that experience changes, and it makes it very difficult to maintain it to the level it was 2 or 3 years ago.
It was the worst year I've ever seen for staffing, and I've been in
Yeah.
hospitality for over 20 years. And we were moving our staff around like chess pieces. Our parks did well. We didn't have to shut down any amenities, but I'm lucky because I have about 400 staff members across the US. So I'm able to move them, say, from Florida to New England, then back to Florida. But it took everything we had, and we're a fairly large company. So it was a strain this year for sure.
and I don't know if it's going to get any better for next year. I mean, the job market right now is just really, there's a lot of jobs available, and people are moving, at least in the area I'm in, Michigan, Indiana area. There's a lot of people bouncing from job to job, trying to find the best pay. And there's a lot of sign-on bonuses that really are encouraging people to continue looking for work even after they found a job. So it's hard to retain people. And I just don't know if it's going to get better next year for
Well,
park owners.
we're
So
hoping to get our J1 International Student Program running again after
Yeah.
COVID subsides. I just have parks in areas of the country that use probably 80% of our workforce were J1 International students, wonderful
Yeah.
students, wonderful employees, but COVID just, stopped the tap, and that really hurt a lot of people.
Gee, Mark, maybe you need to add a jobs board to every one of your campgrounds that you cover.
Yeah,
There
right.
you
Well,
be careful about that.
we kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but it really relates to some of the issues that we're seeing with phantom reservations and illegal subletting of sites. And, when the demand is just so high and people are going to come out of the woodwork to try to nab, they're going to find unique ways to nab their sites. They're going to find unique ways to make money off of anything they can. I mean, like places like RV Share and like Airbnb and Hip Camp all have kind of spurred this mindset. Hey, I have something, I want to try to make money off of it. So, it's just kind of a unique way that people try to make money. So, it'll be interesting.
I think, Ben, on that, I just want to make, so as an industry, we either have rules that we follow or we don't. You can't have some people just not following rules while other people are. It doesn't, either we have rules or we don't have rules. I'm not the decider on that. I'm just saying that I think that needs to happen.
Point well taken. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how all this stuff goes on in the future, especially if the demand stays this high. With the way it was this year, if it continues on to next year, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. So hopefully a lot of these parks get open. We were supposed to add 50,000 new sites this year. Hopefully some of those open next year. So
maybe some entrepreneur will tear down the malls that are out of business and build RV parks right in the center of the city. Kathleen, any spots?
Well, I have probably a good 8 to 10 that are in the queue to be constructed, not at mall locations, but again, they're meeting the classic NIMBY arguments. I want it, but I don't want it in my backyard. And so again, it keeps me on a plane every week, just trying to explain to folks what an RV park is and what it is not, and why it's such an attractive addition to your community.
Yeah, definitely. There's studies out there that show just how much money they spend, campers spend outside of the park. And it can be a significant amount depending on the location. So it definitely benefits the community. But we're getting, I think we're at 39 minutes. So, we're almost at 40 minutes now. So I think it's time to wrap this up. I think that the conversation went pretty well, Mike.
Yeah. This is always fascinating, and just the fact that we went down a rabbit hole means there's a lot more to talk about here.
Oh yeah. Yep. So it was great catching up with you, Mark. Maybe I'll see you at some conferences this fall. Maybe
If you're going to be at the glamping show, that'll be the next one I'm at.
Okay. Yeah, we'll be there, and then Kathleen's going to be there. So we'll just have a reunion.
Yeah,
Mike,
it'll be great.
Mike, why don't you ditch Hawaii?
Well, Hey, I'd love to.
Colorado.
I wrote an article that's going to be in the Glamping Business America's magazine at the show. So
Oh, nice.
at least you can read what I said.
Well, that's great. So, thanks everyone for watching. And next week, I believe we're going to talk about electrical topic in the industry, just RV electrical issues, I think EVs, and how those could impact your RV park. And they're definitely coming. Park owners are seeing them show up at parks. So it's definitely a big topic. So we look forward to talking with you about that next week, Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. So everyone have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ben.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.